All right, welcome back everyone to Tech in Asia's Product Development Conference 2022. I hope you've had a good lunch. If you're just joining us, my name is Nat. I'm the managing editor of Tech in Asia Studios, and this PDC is our signature conference where people from all over the product world come to get tips and inspiration on everything from product development to validating an MVP and scaling high growth products. This is where product enthusiasts will learn from over 20 product leaders, access more than 600 minutes of power-packed presentations, and interact with speakers and participants. If you miss any of the sessions, you can actually tune in to them on the conference platform to watch the playback. And you can also connect and schedule meetings with attendees on the platform. So make sure to check that out. Now, for our first session back after this lunch break, we are going to be decoding DeFi applications with the help of Shaun Heng, head of Spartan Labs, and Wan Wei, head of ecosystem for Multiverse Labs. And to moderate this panel is my colleague, Tech in Asia journalist Deepti Sri. So I'm going to leave the introductions of the session and everyone to Deepti, and I'm going to step away. So Deepti, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Nat. So today we have Wan Wei from Multiverse Labs and Shaun from Spartan Labs. They're here to talk to us about DeFi applications and give us a lot of tips about how to develop a product. And I welcome both of you.
Thank you so much, Defty.
So nice to have you guys here.
Hi, Shaun. Nice to see you again.
Yes, good to see you guys. Hi.
Great. So to quickly begin with the session and talk about what exactly DeFi is and decode some of the applications, I think it's important for our viewers to understand what Spartan Labs and Multiverse Labs does exactly. So can you both introduce your companies to us, please? Maybe start with Wan Wei.
Okay, thank you so much. So Multiverse Labs, we are building a photorealistic metaverse. And on this metaverse, we are populating it with virtual beings powered by AI and ML technologies. So what crypto has to do with it is that when we have virtual beings on the metaverse, we actually do have the virtual native token as well as part of the token economy. So I'm really happy to be here today as head of ecosystem at Multiverse Labs, and especially because I come from a background of product marketing as well. I'm also product marketing certified by PMA. So really happy to be here to be sharing knowledge. Passing over to you, Shaun.
Thanks, Wan Wei. So just a very quick sort of intro about, the overall Spartan group itself. I mean, we have been in the space since 2017, advising and funding projects in the digital asset space. And I think, in 2022, we decided to sort of take it to the next level where we launched a $100 million venture studio called Spartan Labs, which I'm heading up. And our goal is really to, in a way, get our hands dirty and start building in the ecosystem itself. Right. At the moment, we're actually focusing on a lot on internal idea incubation, building ideas that we feel are not being targeted in the market right now, but has that opportunity to have a much larger impact on the broader crypto ecosystem. And so we tend to ideate from ground up, test and validate our assumptions, experiment and prototype to get projects from ideas to an MVP level before deciding whether to accelerate it, by spinning out into a separate entity or, park it aside for a better market opportunity to launch it down the road. So yeah, very excited to chat a bit more about product development and especially on the DeFi side of things.
Awesome. Just to understand digital assets and the crypto world better, I think it would be good to start with what exactly DeFi is and what the applications today are. What are the rising applications today? If you could start off Wan Wei.
Okay, great. So I would like to think of DeFi products as like a vending machine. So what this means is that when you put a coin in the vending machine, you press a button like Coca-Cola, you expect Coca-Cola out, right, as an output. So if you put a coin in and Milo comes out when you press the Coca-Cola button, then something is wrong with the product. So this is how I see DeFi, to remove the intermediaries. So instead of going to, say, mama shop or supermarket to buy a Coca-Cola, you go to the vending machine. So basically, this is a simple metaphor of how I see DeFi products. And the idea is, I think the great grand narrative that applies even in a bear market is that we are banking the unbanked and underbanked for DeFi. And I think that is why DeFi is really powerful and is here to stay and is more than just a hype. Yep.
Got it. Got it. Interesting. I love your analogy. It's right on point. What do you think is the basic function of a DeFi product, Sean?
Yeah, I think sort of to add on to Wan Wei's point, right? I think that's a very good way to sort of understand smart contracts and like what DeFi sort of built upon, right? I think to me there are really a few core tenets of DeFi, and I think Wan Wei has sort of covered it. But to me, there are like three main factors, right? One, to a point, it needs to be able to help that anyone can sort of use it without discrimination. I think that's number one, right? So allowing anyone who is interested to use the product itself and being able to use it without being gated in any extent. I think that's very important from a decentralized perspective. So one, being able to use it without discrimination, that's one. The second is to her point, to remove the intermediary, to remove the middleman, where excess fees are right now being charged by all the different layers within the ecosystem itself. So if you sort of remove all the middlemen, you're actually returning a lot more value to the end users who are the recipient of the product, right? Or even giving back a lot more values to the contributor of the ecosystem itself. And I think the third point is really about the autonomy and the full custody of your own assets, right? Right now, if you use a traditional financial product, for example, you are in fact betting your faith on the fact that the traditional the traditional institution wouldn't fail, right? And you don't actually have control over your own assets. So I think the beauty about DeFi or decentralized products is that you have full custody over your own assets, and that means that you can decide how you want to use it, and how you want to leverage on the assets that you have on hand. So I think that's really the way I would probably think about the components around any DeFi product. So three main points, right? Number one, without discrimination. Number two, to remove the middleman, and number three, full self custody of your own financial assets.
Got it, got it, got it. While the idea of a decentralized product is definitely very appealing to users, I'm sure a lot of product developers out there are looking out for tips and looking out for more ways to develop a product that's actually efficient for users. So what do you think are some of the criteria that product developers should be considering before building a product? If you can talk about this, Sean.
Sure. Well, I think number one, to our earlier point around, when you want to remove like the middlemans, and you want to remove and you want to give the ownership of the assets to the end users themselves, I think security comes to mind, right? Because when you are building a DeFi product, no investor, no users who want to use a product if they do not believe that it's safe and it's secured in that sense. So for any DeFi product, it's always very important to make sure that there's proper smart contract audits being done on the protocol layer itself, because in most cases, money lost in DeFi due to a breach in security usually it's not recoverable, right? So I think that's very important from a build perspective, that whatever you build, you need to be able to build the right trust, and trust comes with the right security being embedded into the product itself. Maybe another point is probably like having which is very typical of any products that anyone is building, right? Be it DeFi or any TradFi products, is really having a good product solution fit to a certain extent, right? So really asking yourself, what problems are we solving with the product that we are building, right? Because in most cases, we see in a way we build a product based on a perceived problem that we see in the market, but in some cases we are sort of fitting a square peg into a round hole, and so making sure that you have a well-designed thought process in terms of evaluating whether the product actually solves a solution is actually very important for us. I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Wan Wei.
Yeah, I'd like to add on 2 points for regulation. So before starting, it is important to realize that the space is very fast moving, and hence regulation is key, right? Like your KYC compliance, and then of course, different countries have different regulations. And this, I mean, even though it's supposed to be decentralized, to some extent, we all start centralized. The The second point I'd like to add is for blockchain scaling solutions, you have sharding, things like your ZK rollouts. I think it is important to have some form of background knowledge on that before starting on your DeFi products or projects. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. That was some good insights for the developers out there. And now that we know that there's such a big problem in, just get letting go of security issues in building a product like this, what do you think are some of the main issues that product developers are going to face while developing the product? What are some of the issues that they should be anticipating, and how can they prepare for the same?
Maybe I can do a quick one on this. One way can add on as well. I think for us, two main issues that we see while building the product, because the space is evolving so quickly every single day, right? I mean, there's always a saying that spending a year in crypto or in Web3 is equivalent to 6-10 years in the traditional world, and I think that's true to some extent because I think everyone is still in that phase of figuring out or building the fundamentals around the entire space itself in crypto and DeFi. So I think on one hand, while the space is evolving so quickly, you have to make sure that whatever you are building, is relevant by the time you launch it. And so I think that time to market becomes very important, where you might want to do a lot more rapid iteration of the product itself to get to the right end users as fast as possible, because for all you could launch 6-12 months later, and the product may not be relevant at that point, or someone else have sort of thought through the same problem and decided to fork an existing protocol layer to kind of build it. And so that time to market becomes a lot faster as well, because everything on in DeFi to some extent it's open source, so there are opportunities for you to fork an existing protocol and make it better based on your understanding of the market itself. So I think that's one point that becomes very important, where the time to market is of utmost importance. And I think the other problem also is that the other challenge I foresee is that as we see more Web2 sort of like strong operators coming to the space to build in Web3 or in crypto, they may not have the right know-hows in terms of the jargons and the terminologies around what they're actually building. So I think that's also another challenge, where there's always new information, and if you are not plugged into the space enough, if you are not in a way degen enough to think about what the up and coming sort of protocol layers are, you might fall into a trap where you're building based on what you know in Web2, and it could become dangerous as you start building DeFi products, which again, to our point earlier, you're actually users are actually entrusting in your smart contract to make sure that it's secure and it's good to use. Yeah.
Yeah, those are really excellent points, Shaun. So to add on, right, I just have one more point to add on. I think mindset is very important, especially a growth mindset. So if we want to port over Web2, kind of like the need for structure, the need for certainty in terms of information and knowledge, I don't think that's going to work very well for Web3, because it's like, as Shaun mentioned, it's moving really, really fast. And hence a growth mindset, a huge dose of humility, and also the willingness to pivot is very important. And sometimes when working with developers, we do realize that this is an issue for developers for very obvious reasons, because why do I pivot so much? And then sometimes there will be some misunderstanding and miscommunication with the management. So I think humility is really very important, and also open-mindedness in that area.
Absolutely. I agree with you. There's a ton of founders we speak to every day who think about coming up with products every month or so, and they're always talking about how there's another product that's beating them to the market. So I completely take your point. I think that it's very important to have a growth mindset, and you look at the evolving challenges within the ecosystem. And while we've discussed what kind of problems developers go through today, I think it would be nice if you guys could share some resources for the product developers out there. What are some of the resources that they can access to make their product building process easier?
Wan Wei, do you want to
If,
go first, or?
Yeah, sure. I think the best resource is a network. As in keep Web2 and Web3 developers like close, because Web2, Web3, I personally do not believe that by the time we read something on a crypto tier 2 media, it's already outdated. So it's better to like follow Twitter as a crypto Bible, DeFi Bible, and most importantly have like Discord groups open, Telegram groups open, like you have like your peers with you, so immediately when there's a hack that happens, you know it immediately. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest regret, I mean, I've been at CoinMarketCap over the past 2 years, and I think one of the biggest regret I had was I failed to create a Twitter account soon enough. Right, so I was actually missing a lot of valuable news or updates that come in very rapidly through Twitter itself. So I would say, like to Wan Wei's point, try to set up a Twitter account. Follow people who are in the building space, right? So again, I think pick your audience, pick the influencers or the Twitter's accounts that would most benefit you. So if you're a developer, follow those who are actually building. If you're a product manager, follow those who are in product and stuff like that. But there's actually a lot of real-time information that's being shared across the Twitter space itself. It can get noisy over time, so you have to make sure that you sort of do a bit of sanity check and filter out the right sort of Twitter accounts on an ongoing basis. Um, I also acknowledge the point. I mean, to Deepti, you were saying like there's so many new projects that come out recently, and I feel like sometimes we're just jumping into it uh, haphazardly, right? And in most cases, I was just having a conversation the other day with a very young guy who wanted to build a new layer one, right? He hasn't even graduated yet, and to me, it's like he doesn't have that necessary experience or even working in any layer one before. So he's sort of just jumping the steps just jumping a few steps ahead and hey, let me build a new layer one in that sense. And I feel like at that point, I mean, my advice to him was, join a couple of these layer one protocols, right? Contribute to them, learn from them, understand what are the pain points that force you to that result in you wanting to create your own layer one, because it's actually very tough work. There's a lot of security involved. There's a lot of um, challenges involved in building your own layer one. I'm not saying it wouldn't work. I don't think there's a apparent winner in the layer one space at this point, but I think having that humility to not just jump into it straight away and say, look, let me work with a few of these layer ones, understand what the pain points are, work in a couple of these Web3 companies before starting your own entrepreneurship journey. I think that would be actually very helpful in terms of helping you to build a better mental framework to in your next ventures ahead.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Now that we're talking about Twitter and we're talking about the kind of options that are available out there, we're seeing that a lot of developers today, a lot of people who are actively involved in Web3 today have made the conscious choice to move from traditional finance to Web3 because they believe in a larger vision of decentralization and larger accessibility. While they're building their product and they're realizing their vision, there obviously needs to be a point when they need some validation for their product to see if their product's still valid, and they're looking for some kind of advice, or they're looking for some kind of a mechanism to kind of look at where their product is headed. What kind of what do you think product developers should be doing at this point when they're looking to validate their product and look at their product market fit? How do you think they can do this? One way, if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, sure. I think at this times Web 2, or rather the standard product marketing test of product market fit would work. So user surveys, but do it fast. Feedback from the already and existing audience who are into DeFi, and basically talking to people and really being engaged with them. And I mean, as of typical user interviews, right, we have to listen for what is unsaid more than what is said, because people sometimes do not know that they actually have a problem there that can be solved, right? So you have to sort of like filter it out. And in my opinion, it is always useful or maybe wise to start to build, no matter how small the amount is, because most of the time people are nice, they don't like to reject other people, but when you start to build, you know that you're solving a pain point if people start to pay. Yeah, so MVP, I would suggest building something really, really marginal, really small, but do not give free. That is my probably 2 cents worth. Yeah.
I'll probably add 2 points to that. One, it's I think as with every sort of product that we are building, especially in the DeFi side of things, we want to make sure that we are listing down all our riskiest assumptions, right? So be it on the regulation side of things, on the security side of things, on the product market fit side of things, just listing down all these different validation assumptions, and going through a very methodical process, and to Wan Wei's point, a lot faster in a much more iterative process to kind of figure out and go through all these different riskiest assumptions. I think that's like one thing that we should always do, especially when building a DeFi product itself. And speaking of MVP, I think there is also a new methodology of like what we call like a MVC, right? Minimum viable community. So a lot of times we're not just building a product itself and hoping that users come and use it. We could also be, building a product with a community itself, right? I think a lot of things that we are doing in Web3 is all about community. And so how do you actually build with a community? What is that minimum viable community that we are thinking about that helps to validate the product assumption itself? I think these are things that we could also take into consideration when building out the initial, product validation side of things.
Awesome. And now that we've discussed the different challenges and the kind of methods that people can choose to validate their product, we've discussed quite a number of steps before actually launching the product. And now that we're also considering a lot of increased regulation from market, even though it's a decentralized market, we are seeing the need for some kind of regulation in these products as well. So there's a larger need for security, and there's a larger need for an actual customer value proposition. What do you think is the largest customer value proposition today for DeFi applications? Why should a customer go for a DeFi product instead of a Web2 product?
I think it's really about accessibility, right? I mean, like we were saying, I think a DeFi product, it's where it's open source and anyone who believes in it or want to use it can use it if he or she decides to. So I think it's really about how do you build for accessibility. And that means maybe having also a very simple and easy to use, one-stop shop sort of like a product or solution that's targeted at users who are not familiar with the space yet. Because when you think about accessibility, you're talking about those people who are maybe slightly less educated, may not have the same opportunity. So how do you make it easy and at the same time secure for them to sort of interact with these different DeFi apps and protocol layers, right? I think that's where having a very easy to use sort of user experience, I think that comes in. But at the same time, being mindful that you don't want to make it so simple where people are not aware of what they're actually using, right? So I think in some cases, it's actually better to have a few gating mechanisms, but educate them along the way. So in every step of the way, sort of help them to walk through their customer discovery journey together with them, so that they are not just blindly clicking a few buttons and getting to the end goal. Because your role as a developer, as a product manager, is really not to just drive through to conversion, right? But actually to help them, to educate them, to make sure that they understand what they're actually interacting with and going down the educational route with them.
That makes sense. I think a lot of people today need to be educated in this space, especially as users. We might know all the basics of Web3, we might know the basics of blockchain, we might know the basics of DeFi, but I think every product's very different on its own. And today, when I'm trying out a new Web3 product as well, I need to go through a manual to make sure I'm getting all the steps right, to make sure I actually am making full use of the product. So I think it's a very important step you've spoken about. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this, Wan Wei?
I think the point I would like to add is that as more and more capital flows into the Web3 space, UI, UX will be very important as well. And we are already seeing a lot of very talented UI, UX designers in the space. So I think you just give it like 2 years. I mean, if people were to continue building in this bear market, right? I think soon we'll be seeing like an all-in-one DeFi aggregator with like superb UI, UX interface. And I think when we get there, the moment we get there will be the moment where we see a lot of like Web2 people onboarding into a Web3 space, which is very exciting for a lot of people. Because currently, I think if we step in a cafe, people in the cafe are still really like scared of like this random DeFi app and wallet, very, very fearful of losing all their money. And it's not helping. I mean, the Terra Luna saga is not helping at all. So all in all, I guess, yeah, we just have to pay attention to how do we, through education, through this kind of UI UX improvement, make it less fearful and less scary experience for the average person on the street.
Got it. I think you've also brought up a very important point. Speaking of the Luna saga and the likes, there's a lot of trouble happening in this space, but along with a lot of good stuff also. But there's always a sense of fear when you listen to a big loss like the Luna saga. At this point, there's always a bigger discussion as to, is Web3 really as safe as we consider it? Are Web2 people really going to step into the Web3 world at the end of the day? Do you think that at some point there will be a parallel between the two worlds? Do you
Should I
want to
go
talk
first?
about it?
Oh,
Parallel within the Shaun, you can go first.
okay. No, I think it's a good question, right? I think that's also, I think if you talk about DeFi versus TradFi, whether there's a parallel universe, the same can be said about Web 2 versus Web 3. And I honestly don't think that it's really we are not really making a transition happening, right? It's not really about transitioning from TradFi to DeFi or Web 2 to Web 3. I think there are pros and there are cons in both, in both sort of ecosystem itself, right? So I think it's really about looking at the best of both worlds and figure out how do I build a better business model out of it. So even in labs or even in products that we are building, we don't have to be so rigid in terms of saying that, hey, I'm going to build 100% DeFi product. I'm going to build 100% Web3 crypto related product itself. I think there are pros and cons in having a synergy of both. And to just, for example, to share, right? I mean, if you look at DeFi, for example, transactions are irreversible, and so that means sending assets to the wrong address to the wrong place. Actually, it's a very painful process. I'm not sure if you guys have gone through it before, but it's a very painful process, and it's almost very difficult to recover at the end of the day. Whereas the same can be said about TradFi, where you send it to the wrong address, at least there is an intermediary that can help reverse the transactions, obviously within certain limits, or within certain parameters. And so I think it's really about trying to understand why are people actually moving into DeFi? Why are people actually building Web3? What are the pros that we can see in those two in that ecosystem itself? And how do I actually bring this closer to the current real world, right? And build better business model, build better products of the synergies of both sides of the equation. Yeah, so that's how I would think about this, where I feel like we are actually looking towards a future that both coexist and both runs in parallel, that sort of feeds off each other in terms of a positive feedback loop.
Yes, I completely agree. And how close do you think one way we are to this kind of a future where there is an actual synergy between the two worlds?
That's a really good question. I think about this every single day, in the context of metaverse as well, because recently the dinners I've been having, the age group is getting younger and younger. I'm the oldest person on the table, and like we speak to. I was just mentoring at NUS Hackathon 2 weeks ago. So one of the winning groups, right? They were like 19-year-old kids. Then
Wow.
he told me that, hey, I run a VC fund running crypto, and he knows all the crypto VC people. He wanted to make introductions for me, and I was like, wow. So I think Web3 is their generation. In 10 years' time, they will be the bosses, they will be the entrepreneurs, they will be the movers and shakers of the Web3 world. So and if you think about it, right, they are already spending a lot of time on Discord, playing Roblox, Fortnite. This is their world, man. And I am already feeling a generational gap. I mean, I'm like 30s, in my 30s, and they're in the 20s or like 10s. so so how do we bridge the gap, right? I think the 30s and the 40s have to humble ourselves to really learn their mentality. People are very comfortable all in. Like last night I had dinner with like two people in the crypto space, 25 years old, 25 to 28. Yeah, they were like, oh, we all in on our crypto, put all the assets on crypto. I was like, wow. And this is not something that people of my age will all in for, right? So I think yeah, that I think instead of like brushing them off, there is this humility needed on our age group and above to fully accept their perspective and also learn from this kind of fast moving industry, and growth mindset is needed really.
Absolutely, absolutely. There was another blockchain conference I had attended recently, and I came across just what you did. I came across a bunch of 19-year-olds and 21-year-olds building amazing Web3 products. And what they said was very similar to what you're saying. They also spoke about how there's no discrimination in Web3. There's nobody looking at you and saying, hey, you're so young, I cannot judge you based on that. So I think that does make a lot of room for fresh talent, for a lot of creativity. I'm sure they're going to have their own issues along the way, but I think it's a good time to start early, I guess. The Web3 space really encourages young talent. That's an interesting point we're talking about here. Is there anything you guys would like to like talk about in with regard to young people entering the scene today? Your 2 cents for them.
No, I think sort of to add on to the point, right? I think humility works both ways. I feel like at this point, yeah, to One Way's point earlier that as the older generation, or at least those who are a bit more senior in their journey, needs that humility to understand and to accept the viewpoints of the younger ones. I feel like that also happens on the other parallel where, in any of these products or projects that this 19th and the 20s of the world are building, I think it's also important to bring in and to accept the help of the those who are a bit more senior down the learning curve, right? Who have been through a lot more processes, who have been in that phase where they are building, the best marketplaces, the best fintechs, the best payment products of the world, right? And help them to understand both sides, because it could also get very dangerous over time as we have the entrepreneurs and the builders in their 20s, who hasn't actually been through a proper financial crisis, who hasn't actually been through a proper market breakdown, right? To be building financial products of the new world. So I think it's really important to have to have a well balanced sort of viewpoint or organization that sort of feeds off the best of both the young minds of the world, and also the more experienced minds of the old world, if I could sort of say that. Yeah.
Yes, that makes complete sense. That's how I think we can.
To cut you guys off. But so sorry to cut you guys off, especially for such an exciting topic. But we do have to move on. So thank you, Shaun and Wan Wei, and of course, thank you so much to Deepti for moderating this session. For anyone who wants to learn more about the DeFi world, you can get in touch with Shaun and Wan Wei, and with Spartan Labs and Multiverse Labs, of course. Now, to move on to our next session, we have a fireside chat about process efficiency on testing your product. So I'll catch you on that session. Don't go away.